It hurts. It hurts a lot. And it is interesting when we talk about New England, everybody talks with a sense of calm and they'll be able to replace, this guy easily or that guy easily, as opposed to, we need to go trade for Khalil Mack and get Tom Brady more help. Like, we don't usually talk about that with New England, and there's good reason for it. The idea that Trent Brown is their starting left tackle, I was with Trent in San Francisco when we drafted him in the 7th round. He's a giant man, but I never would have thought he'd be the starting left tackle for the New England Patriots 4 years later. But that's what Dante Scarnecchia does, and I brought his name up a ton of times. He needs to be in the New England Ring of Fame or whatever that is around the stadium, because he has done such a good job with so many different guys fitting in, similar to the way they do the job they do with the receivers. So I'm not as worried because of Dante and the things that they're able to do and the way that they'll help whoever comes in at right tackle and the way that they'll help the offensive line to allow them to be successful. But whenever you lose your first-round draft pick, who is an emerging player, I mean, it's terrible.
I'm not underselling at all the job Dante Scarnecchia does. I've heard you talk about him and others talk about him in glowing ways the way I've never heard an offensive line coach talked about. So I recognize that. But isn't it fair to say we don't yet know the job he's going to do with Trent Brown? They traded for Trent Brown during the draft. In addition to trading for Trent Brown, they used their #1 pick on a guy who they wanted to transition from guard to tackle. The reason that this guy who you thought would never potentially in 4 years be the left tackle for the Patriots is going to be the starting left tackle is not necessarily because that was the plan from the get-go. That is now the only plan they have. They lost their swing tackle this offseason to Dallas. Obviously, Nate Solder left in free agency. And so 2 guys they acquired on draft day, Isaiah Wynn and Trent Brown, were supposed to compete for that spot. And now Isaiah Wynn's out of the competition for either tackle spot for the season. I'm not saying he can't do a good job with Trent Brown, but I don't know if Trent Brown can play left tackle in this league at a starting capacity.
Well, he's been working at left tackle. He's been playing in the games. Have you talked about him?
What? From the preseason games?
Yeah.
No.
Have you sat back and go, oh, wow, they've got a real problem with protection in New England?
No.
Then he can play left tackle for the Patriots. I mean, the fact that it hasn't come up and it hasn't been an issue is really encouraging. Obviously, it's a little bit too much of a stretch to make that decision now, but we're not talking about the issues they have. We're not talking about Nate Solder's replacement creating havoc for Tom Brady. And to me, that's a good indication of the fact that the problem, maybe it's not perfect, but it's better than people thought.
No, they got problems, though. The left tackle, now, is he as good as the left tackle that they had, Nate Solder? No. But Dante Scarnecchia, they are going to be staying up late at night because they're going to have to be very, very creative in the run game. And I believe it's more important that they develop some type of running attack because they don't know who's going to be there on the offensive line. And you can't back Tom Brady up 45 times a game and think you're going to be able to survive him at 41 years of age. So I just believe it's very, very important that they come up with some identity in the first month of the season. I wouldn't be surprised if they struggled. If you look at New England, when do you want to play them? You definitely don't want to play them in January. You don't want to play them in February. But if you keep going back in the months, December, November, you got a chance. But, man, October, that's your last real month. And September is where they can be got because they're still trying to find. And if you look at their record month after month, it just gets better and better. And I think that they'll try to figure this out in the first month of the season. That being that they'll go a little unbalanced line at sometimes. They'll go 2 tight ends. They can't play as much 2 backs or 3 receivers as they want to because you have to be able to protect that offensive line and protect Tom Brady. That will be a priority coming out of training camp. So when we see week #1, we will see what they've come up with. But it'll be really interesting to see as we go through games 1 through 4 how much they change and what's their identity.
And I always thought that the early part of the season was the hardest part of the season because you don't know what you're getting from everybody else, and there's changeover in coordinators and head coaches, so that dramatically changes the scheme. But you also don't truly know who you are. So and I've said this before, you go into the preseason, you go into training camp thinking you're going to be this, but then the reality is you could be something totally different. And what I always thought we did a good job of in New England is accepting who we were and what we did and building on that as opposed to constantly trying to be something we weren't. And each year it evolved a little bit differently.
So let me ask it a different way. Is their offensive line their biggest concern, in your opinion, on this Patriots team?
No, that's not a big concern. Is it terrible that they lost their starting right tackle and a young guy? Yeah, that's not great. Is it my biggest concern? No. I think Dante and I think Josh and I think Tom will figure it out.
I would be more concerned about their defensive line as a unit, because you don't have a quarterback. If you have a weak unit, which their offensive line is one of their weaker units, a quarterback can save that. A good offensive line coach, by knowing what you can and can't do. If you don't have no pass rush, you have to blitz, you have to play more man-to-man. Those are things I still would be more concerned about. Coach, would you agree with that, coming out of New England at this point, even though they did create a pass rush in the first couple of games?
And just based off of last year, they obviously struggled defensively. They lost their defensive coordinator, so they don't have that continuity. They don't really have a one guy who's going to call the shots. It's sort of a group effort. Bill will be involved, but there's still a lot of young guys who are going to make decisions about game plan and about when to call things, and they're going to learn throughout that process. And it's not like they were starting from a great point last year.
Well, and listen, this is one of the things I believe you love about the Patriots. Chris, you had the great quote that I believe said Bill Belichick told you, or said it publicly, which is, it's not my job to get the best players, it's my job to get the best team. I hope I'm not mangling that quote. If it were...
It's not about great players, it's about a great team.
Okay.
Producing that.
Right, producing a great team. If it were any team other than the Patriots, and we did just a blind look at the roster, and we said, okay, their number one receiver left in free agency. What they got back for it was a draft pick who's now not going to play for them. Their guy who they thought was going to come in and be their number one receiver, he's suspended the first 4 weeks of the season. Their number one corner left in free agency. What they got for him was Jason McCourty. Like, we go down the list, right? They lost Dion Lewis in free agency. They lost Danny Amendola in free agency without bringing a lot of guys back in. I know in the running backfield they brought in Jeremy Hill. They drafted Sony Michel, but where they lost their left tackle in free agency, all these things, we would say, man, that team is not equipped to be nearly as good this year as they were last year. With New England, we don't have those. We have learned since they've won at least 12 games every year since 2010 that they will find a way. I do think Chris's point about the first month is a time to get them, and the fact that you make fun of me on the schedule grid, first 2 games of the year, Houston and Jacksonville. There's 2 things I know. Those are 2 teams with excellent pass rushes. Clowney's back as a full participant at practice this week. Watt, Clowney, Merciless the first week. Maybe the best front in football in Jacksonville, certainly in the AFC in week 2. That's a tough opening 2 weeks if you're in flux on the offensive line, when you also don't have Julian Edelman. Like, there are things there where there would be concerns, but it's not a flashing red light like it would be for any other team, because they've earned that benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, they've earned that through the years, but also they don't have the greatest football coach ever. And that's what New England has in Bill Belichick. They don't have potentially the greatest player ever in Tom Brady. So typically, Gronk being out, Edelman being out, they got 12 back there. And 12 has been able to overcome all those things. I believe this is one of the more tough obstacles that they will have to overcome. And that would be losing Nate Solder in free agency, and then now losing Isaiah Wynn, their first-round draft pick, early in training camp.
And New England may lose household names, but then New England creates household names. And so there'll be a whole nother group of names, whether it's the receiving core, whether it's a young offensive lineman, who nobody knows right now, who people will know about shortly. And that's all based on the fact that they're able to go in, do their role in that system, and they win. And when they win, everybody's boat is risen up.
Yeah, I didn't know Coach Mangini until he went to New England.
Boom, just like that.
And now, thanks for watching. Subscribe here to get the latest from the show. Also, be sure to check out more of the best clips from First Things First, or go watch a few segments from our other shows on FS1.